Maya stood breathless as the most feared man in Seoul pinned her against the mural. Dante-O was a storm of ink and raw power, but as he leaned in to whisper, "I want to come in from behind," Maya's blood turned to ice. It wasn't his reputation that terrified her, it was the strange, rhythmic ticking vibrating against her spine. Glancing down, she caught a glimpse of a cold, pulsing light glowing through the seam of his trousers. The Mafia boss wasn't hiding a weapon. He was hiding a secret that defied every law of nature. Subscribe for more stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Comment below. Where are you watching from? The blindfold came off, and Maya's eyes struggled to adjust to the dim glow of the estate's foyer. The man who'd removed it, a silent guard with a scar bisecting his lip, stepped back into shadow, leaving her alone in a room that smelled of cedar and something metallic she couldn't name. Her pulse hammered against her ribs because the last thing she remembered was signing an NDA so thick it felt like a death warrant. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, deliberate and unhurried, each one a countdown she couldn't stop. When Dante-O finally emerged from the darkness, the air itself seemed to thin. He was taller than the photo suggested, his shoulders broad enough to block the archway, tattoos crawling up his neck like they were still hunting for skin to claim. His eyes, dark, unblinking, locked onto hers, and Maya's throat closed because she'd seen those eyes before, in news footage of crime scenes where bodies were found in pieces. "You're smaller than I expected," he said, voice low and textured like gravel scraped over silk. Not a greeting. A judgment. Maya forced her hands to stay still at her sides even though they wanted to curl into fists. "You're exactly what I expected." The words left her mouth before her brain could stop them, and she watched his jaw tighten, a muscle jumping beneath the ink. He didn't smile. He studied her the way a surgeon studies an incision site. Then he turned, gesturing for her to follow, and Maya's legs obeyed even though every instinct screamed to run because the door behind her had already locked with a soft, final click. The hallway stretched impossibly long, lined with portraits of men whose eyes seemed to track her movement. Dante walked ahead, always ahead, never once turning his back fully toward her, his body angled just enough that she could only see his profile, his left shoulder always leading. It was subtle, but Maya had spent years studying composition and negative space, and this wasn't paranoia. This was defense. He stopped before a set of double doors and pushed them open with one hand. The room beyond stole the breath from her lungs, a private gallery, wall soaring 20 feet high, and there, dominating the far wall, was the mural. It had been beautiful once. Now it was a corpse. Slashes of black paint obliterated faces, whole sections peeled away like skin after a burn, and at the center, where a family crest should have been, someone had carved the word traitor deep enough to crack the plaster. "My grandfather commissioned this the year I was born," Dante said, and for the first time, his voice carried something other than control. Something that tasted like ash. Before he was executed in this very room. Maya's stomach turned because she could see the stains now, faint brown smears on the marble floor that no amount of bleach could erase. "You want me to restore a crime scene. I want you to restore a legacy." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell gunpowder clinging to his collar, and pulled a brush from his jacket pocket, a sable-tipped Kolinsky, worth more than her rent. He held it out, but when she reached for it, his fingers closed over hers, trapping her hand against the wooden handle. His skin was fever-hot, his grip absolute. "Can you do that, Maya? Can you make the dead beautiful again?" Her name in his mouth felt like a brand. She met his gaze and saw the test behind the question, the way he was measuring her fear against her need. Her student loans were a noose. Her eviction notice was 3 days old. She had exactly $400 in her account and a mother in a care facility she couldn't afford. So she didn't pull away. She let him feel the tremor in her hand, let him see the desperation she'd stopped trying to hide. "Depends," she whispered. "How much are you paying for resurrection?" His thumb stroked once across her knuckles, a touch so deliberate it felt like a signature, and then he released her. "Enough to make you forget you were ever poor. But there's a condition." He stepped back, but his body shifted again, that same careful angling that kept his back away from her line of sight. "You live here until it's finished. No phones. No visitors. No leaving." The brush felt heavier now, like it was made of bone instead of wood. "That sounds less like a job and more like a sentence." "Consider it protective custody," Dante said, and the smile that finally touched his lips was the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "My enemies would love to know I've brought someone new into my home. Someone soft. Someone breakable." His gaze traveled down her body, not with lust, but with the cold inventory of a man cataloging vulnerabilities. You'll be safer in this cage than you've ever been in your life. Maya looked at the ruined mural, then at the man who ruled a kingdom of blood and secrets, and realized the door behind her hadn't just locked. It had disappeared entirely. Maya's hands moved across the mural for 6 hours straight, but she could feel Dante's stare drilling into her shoulder blades like a physical weight. Every brushstroke felt exposed, judged, as if he was searching for proof she'd lied about her skill. She didn't turn around because the moment she acknowledged him, she'd lose whatever fragile control she still had. "You missed a shadow," his voice cut through the silence, and she flinched hard enough to smear cobalt across Virgin Mary's halo. She spun, paintbrush raised like a weapon. "If you're going to hover, at least make yourself useful." The words came out sharper than intended, but her father had hovered too, over her report cards, her college applications, her mother's hospital bed, until the day he decided hovering wasn't enough and simply left. Dante's eyebrow lifted, but he approached, rolling up his sleeves. The tattoos she'd glimpsed before now unfurled in full detail, a dragon devouring a phoenix on his right forearm, Hunja characters spelling what looked like dates and names climbing his left. One name had been scored through with scar tissue, deliberate and savage. Who was that? She pointed to the ruined ink before she could stop herself. "My brother." He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter she hadn't noticed, pressing one into her paint-stained hand. He thought loyalty was negotiable. The past tense sat between them like a third body. Maya's throat constricted because she understood that grammar. Her mother existed only in past tense now, 6 months buried, and Maya had been too broke to afford the funeral her mother deserved. She drank, and the whiskey scorched all the way down. "Why do you only restore broken things?" Dante asked, his gaze too steady, too knowing. "Why do you hide in a house big enough for 50 people?" She countered, her pulse spiking because the question had teeth and she'd just bared them. Something shifted in his expression, not softening, but cracking, like ice under weight. He reached out, thumb grazing her cheekbone, and when he pulled back, cobalt blue stained his skin. His touch lingered in the nerve endings of her face, burning hotter than the whiskey. "You had paint." The door exploded inward. 3 men in dark suits flooded the room, one of them dragging a 4th man by the hair, blood streaming from his nose. "Boss," the lead suit barked, "we caught him in the server room." Dante's hand dropped from Maya's face, and when he turned toward the intruder, every trace of the man who just touched her vanished, replaced by something that moved like a predator recognizing prey. Dante's hand shot out, gripping the bleeding man's jaw with enough force that bone creaked audibly. "Who sent you?" His voice dropped an octave, stripped of anything resembling the man who'd touched Maya's cheek seconds ago. The traitor's eyes rolled white. "I don't, please, I swear." "Wrong answer." Dante nodded once, and the lead suit produced a pair of pliers. Maya's stomach lurched because her father had used pliers too, the night he'd torn apart a childhood dollhouse looking for her mother's hidden jewelry. The same night he'd sworn he'd never hurt them even as her mother bled from a split lip. She stumbled backward, her spine hitting the mural, paint smearing across her shirt. Dante's gaze snapped to her, and something flickered across his face, calculation, then decision. "Take him to the East Wing," he ordered. "I'll handle this after I've secured my guest." The men dragged the traitor out, his screams echoing down the marble hallway until a door slammed and swallowed the sound whole. Maya's hands shook so violently she had to clasp them together, nails biting into her palms hard enough to draw crescents of blood. "You didn't need to see that." Dante moved toward her slowly, like she was a spooked animal. "My world has rules. Break them, and you break bones," Maya finished, her voice cracking on the last word. "Is that what happens to people who try to leave your protective custody?" His jaw tightened, but instead of answering, he extended his hand. "Come with me. I want to show you something that might help you understand why I built this cage in the first place." Every instinct screamed not to touch him, but her fingers found his anyway because some broken part of her recognized the fracture in his voice, the same fracture she'd heard in her own when she'd begged her father to stay, knowing he wouldn't. Dante led her through a hidden door behind a bookshelf, down a stone staircase that smelled of earth and jasmine, until they emerged into a garden so lush it felt like stepping into another world. Moonlight painted everything silver, the koi pond, the cherry blossoms, the stone bench worn smooth by years of use. "My mother planted this," Dante said, his thumb still pressed against Maya's pulse point like he was memorizing its rhythm. "The day before my father's enemies burned our family home to the ground. She died in the fire, But this survived. Sometimes destruction leaves behind something worth saving. Maya's throat closed because she'd scattered her mother's ashes in a park they couldn't afford to maintain, and within a month, the city had paved it over for a parking lot. You're telling me all this violence is just gardening? I'm telling you that peace requires boundaries. His free hand gestured to the high wall surrounding them, topped with razor wire that glinted like teeth. Without my necessary evil, 20 families would be homeless. 50 businesses would close. The order I maintain keeps people alive, even if the cost is blood. She should have pulled away. Should have demanded he take her back to the mural, back to the illusion of safety. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever get tired of being the monster everyone needs you to be?" His eyes widened fractionally, the first genuine surprise she'd seen crack his armor. "Every single day," he whispered, and the rawness in those 3 words hit her harder than any violence could. "But until you walked into my house, I never had a reason to want to be anything else." A servant appeared at the garden entrance, head bowed, carrying a tray with 2 covered plates. Dante released Maya's hand, and the loss of contact felt like a punishment. "I had dinner prepared. Stay. Please." The please destroyed her because powerful men didn't beg, and yet here he was, offering her a choice in a place where choice was supposedly extinct. She sat on the bench, and he sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched, far enough that she could still breathe. The food was simple: rice, grilled fish, vegetables that tasted like they'd been picked hours ago. No titles. No guards. Just 2 people eating under stars that didn't care about blood or restoration or the lies they told themselves to survive. "This feels like a date," Maya said, and immediately regretted it because the word date implied futures, and futures required both of them to live past tomorrow. Dante set down his chopsticks, and when he looked at her, his expression carried the weight of a confession. "Good. Because I haven't been on one in 7 years, and I'd forgotten what it felt like to want someone to stay." The garden wall suddenly felt less like protection and more like a countdown, and Maya realized with startling clarity that she was falling for a man whose world would eventually demand she choose between her conscience and her heart. A gunshot cracked through the night air, close enough to rattle the cherry blossoms, and Dante was on his feet instantly, his body angled between her and the sound, always protecting, never exposing his back. "Stay here," he commanded, but his hand lingered on her shoulder for one breath too long, and Maya understood that the real danger wasn't the bullet. It was how badly she wanted him to come back. The gunshot turned out to be a warning, a bullet lodged in the garden stone wall with a note wrapped around it that Dante read once before incinerating with his lighter. He didn't tell Maya what it said, but his hand trembled as he crushed the ashes, and she knew enough about threats to understand this one had teeth. "Pack your brushes," he said, already pulling her toward the house. "You're moving into my quarters. Tonight." Maya's pulse spiked because his quarters meant his bed, his space, the place where the monster took off his armor. "I'm fine in the guest wing." "The guest wing has windows." His grip on her wrist tightened, not enough to hurt but enough to stop her from arguing. "Windows are liability. My room is reinforced steel and bulletproof glass. You want to debate architecture, or do you want to survive until morning?" She didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like surrender, so she followed him up 3 flights of stairs to a door that required both a keycard and a fingerprint scan. The room beyond was massive but austere, a king bed with military crisp corners, a single bookshelf, and a bathroom door left conspicuously ajar. No photographs. No warmth. Just the den of a man who'd forgotten how to live anywhere but the edge of violence. "You take the bed," Dante said, already pulling a pillow toward the leather couch. We're adults." Maya's voice came out steadier than her hands. "We can share a bed without it meaning something." But her mother had said the same thing the night she'd let Maya's father back into their apartment, and by dawn, he'd emptied their bank account and disappeared into the kind of silence that still echoed. Dante's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her mouth before snapping back up like he'd caught himself committing a crime. "You don't know what you're offering." "I'm offering practicality," she lied, and they both knew it. The first night, they built a wall of pillows between them, a border that felt more symbolic than physical. The second night, Maya woke to find Dante's arm draped across her waist, his face buried in her hair, his breathing synced to hers like they'd been doing this for years. She didn't move because moving meant acknowledging that the wall had failed, and she wasn't ready to face what that meant. By the third night, the tension had teeth. Every brush of skin felt electric. Every shared glance lasted 3 seconds too long. Maya started noticing the details. How Dante always showered with the door locked, how he disappeared into the bathroom at exactly 9 p.m. each evening, how he emerged 10 minutes later with his jaw clenched and his pupils slightly dilated. She told herself it was none of her business. But her father had kept secrets too, pill bottles hidden in coat pockets, late-night phone calls he'd claimed were work, and those secrets had rotted their family from the inside out. So when Dante left for a meeting with his lieutenants, Maya did the thing she swore she wouldn't do. She searched his bathroom. The medication bottle was tucked behind shaving cream, label scraped off, but the prescription number was still visible. She photographed it with shaking hands, then noticed the crumpled paper in the trash, a medical schematic showing a skeletal diagram with sections highlighted in red, mechanical components overlaid on bone structure, and handwritten notes in the margins about phantom pain management and proprioceptive recalibration. The bathroom door slammed open. Dante stood in the threshold, his expression colder than she'd ever seen it, colder than when he'd gripped the traitor's jaw, colder than when bullets had torn through his garden. Looking for something. Maya's fingers were still clutching the schematic, damning evidence of her betrayal. I was just what? He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, snatching the paper from her hand. Just violating the one boundary I had left? Just proving that trust is a fairy tale people tell themselves before they get burned. You're taking mystery medication and hiding medical diagrams. Her voice cracked because this wasn't about trust. It was about the sickness in her gut that said everyone she'd ever let close had eventually shown her the monster beneath their skin. What am I supposed to think? You're supposed to think that some parts of me are none of your damn business. He crumpled the schematic, but his hand was shaking again, and this time she saw what she'd missed before, the way his weight favored his right leg, the slight hitch in his gait when he forgot to compensate, the reason he never let anyone stand behind him. Show me, Maya whispered, and it wasn't a request. It was a dare. Dante's pupils dilated, his breathing turning ragged. You don't want to see what's under the armor, Maya. Trust me. I'm already locked in your room, she shot back, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating off his body. I'm already complicit in whatever empire you've built on blood and secrets. So stop treating me like I'm too fragile to handle the truth and show me what you're so terrified I'll run from. His hand shot out, gripping her throat, not squeezing, just holding, his thumb pressed against her racing pulse. And if I show you and you do run? What then? She leaned into his palm, letting him feel how her heartbeat didn't slow, didn't stutter. Then you'll know I'm just like everyone else who's ever left you. But if I stay... She let the sentence hang between them, a promise neither of them was ready to make. Dante's control shattered. He kissed her like drowning, his mouth brutal and desperate, his free hand fisting in her hair hard enough to sting. Maya kissed back with equal violence because this wasn't romance. This was 2 broken people trying to prove they could still feel something other than fear. His teeth caught her bottom lip, copper blooming on her tongue, and she gasped into his mouth, her nails raking down his back hard enough to leave marks through his shirt. He pulled away first, his forehead pressed against hers, both of them panting like they'd survived something neither could name. You want the truth. His voice was wrecked, raw. Fine. But once you see it, there's no unseeing it. No pretending you don't know why I'm the monster everyone whispers about. Maya's hands found his belt, not to seduce but to answer, and when her fingers grazed the waistband of his trousers, she felt it, cold metal where warm skin should be, and a faint, rhythmic vibration that matched the ticking she'd felt against her spine in the gallery. Her breath caught because this wasn't medication or injury. This was something that rewrote every assumption she'd built about the man standing in front of her. Maya's final brushstroke sealed the Virgin Mary's halo in gold leaf, completing what had taken 3 weeks but felt like a lifetime. The mural blazed under the gallery lights, resurrection made visible, beauty clawed back from ruin. She stepped down from the scaffolding, her hands cramping from hours of precision work, and found Dante standing in the doorway with an expression that looked like grief. It's finished, she said, and the words tasted like ash because finished meant packed bags and a car waiting to carry her back to a world where men like Dante didn't touch her face and confess their brokenness in moonlit gardens. He nodded once, his throat working like he was swallowing something sharp. I had my chef prepare dinner. One last meal before. He didn't finish the sentence because neither of them could bear to say the word goodbye. The dining room table was set for 2, candles flickering between them like tiny funeral pyres. Maya's appetite had died somewhere between the mural and the realization that she'd spent 3 weeks falling for a man whose world would eventually devour her whole. But she ate anyway, each bite mechanical, because her mother had taught her that you finish what's on your plate even when your heart is breaking, a lesson learned over dinners where her father's empty chair screamed louder than any argument. "I don't want you to leave," Dante said suddenly, his knuckles white around his wine glass. "But I can't ask you to stay because I'm not," his voice cracked, the first time she'd heard his armor splinter completely. "I'm not a whole man, Maya. What you felt in the bathroom, what you'll see if we go further, it's not just scars. It's machinery. Metal where bone should be. I lost my leg and half my hip in an ambush 5 years ago, and the experimental prosthetic keeping me alive is classified technology that costs more than most people make in a lifetime." Maya's chest constricted because she understood now. The medication was pain management, the careful angling was compensation. The fear in his eyes wasn't about violence but about being seen as less than human. "Do you think I care about what's under your skin?" Her voice came out fierce enough to make him flinch. "I watched you build a garden in the middle of a war zone. I watched you protect me from your own darkness even when it cost you control. I don't care about your crimes or your metal or the fact that you're the monster soul whispers about in the dark." "Then what do you care about?" he asked, and the rawness in the question felt like watching someone bleed out in real time. "I care that you're the first person who's ever made me want to stay." She stood, her chair scraping against marble, and extended her hand across the table. "So stop giving me reasons to leave and take me to bed before I lose my nerve." His eyes widened, pupils blown dark with something that looked like terror and hunger in equal measure. He took her hand, his grip trembling, and led her up the stairs to his quarters where the bed they'd shared for a week suddenly felt like a confessional. The air thickened with years of unspoken desire, with the weight of two people who'd spent lifetimes hiding their fractures from the world. Dante kissed her slowly this time, reverently, like she was something precious he'd been allowed to hold but never keep. His hands mapped her body with a precision that spoke to muscle memory. Practiced, controlled, safe. But when she reached for his belt, his entire body went rigid, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Wait," he whispered against her mouth, and the vulnerability in that single word nearly broke her. He stepped back, his hands shaking as they moved to the buttons of his shirt. I want to come in from behind." Maya's blood turned to ice because the phrasing was wrong, the hesitation too sharp, and suddenly she remembered the metallic ticking from the hook, the strange gait, the way he never let anyone see his back. This wasn't about preference. This was about shame. "Why?" she asked, even though her hands were already reaching for him, already ready to accept whatever truth he was about to reveal. "Because if you see it first," Dante said, his voice breaking on the last word, "you'll understand why I can never be what you deserve. And I need one more moment, just one, where you look at me like I'm still worth saving." His hands moved to his waist, fingers fumbling with the hidden clasps beneath his belt, and Maya caught the glint of something that wasn't fabric or flesh, a cold, pulsing light that glowed through the seam of his trousers like a heartbeat made visible. The rhythmic ticking intensified, mechanical and alive, and she realized with startling clarity that the man she'd fallen for wasn't hiding a weapon. He was hiding the price of survival, written in titanium and circuitry, and the shame of it was killing him more slowly than any bullet ever could. Maya's hand slid to his hip, pulling him closer, and her palm met something that made her breath catch. Not skin, not fabric, but metal, cold and unyielding beneath the thin material of his pants. The surface was smooth, almost seamless, but she felt the joints, the articulation points, and beneath it all, that rhythmic pulse like a second heartbeat fighting to sync with his real one. Dante went statue still, every muscle locked, his eyes squeezed shut like he was bracing for impact. "Don't," he whispered, but it wasn't a command. It was a plea. Maya's fingers traced the seam where flesh met titanium, following the line down to where his thigh should have been solid muscle but instead felt like precision-engineered components wrapped in synthetic skin. The glint she'd noticed before blazed brighter now, a thin strip of blue light pulsing along what looked like a docking port at his hip, the kind of interface she'd only seen in sci-fi films. "Dante, what?" "Assassination attempt," he said, his voice stripped of all the gravel and control that usually armored it. 5 years ago. They planted an IED in my car, and I was too arrogant to check. The blast took my left leg below the knee, shattered my hip socket, severed the femoral artery. I died twice on the operating table before a military contractor offered me an experimental prosthetic that cost 8 million won and required me to become a human test subject. His hands shook as he unfastened his belt, then the hidden magnetic clasps beneath it, and when the fabric fell away, Maya saw the truth he'd been hiding. His left leg from mid-thigh down was a masterwork of biomechanical engineering, carbon fiber bone structure, pneumatic muscle actuators, neural interface ports that glowed faintly where they connected to his remaining tissue. The hip joint was even more complex, a ball and socket made of medical-grade titanium that disappeared into his pelvis, held in place by surgical screws she could see beneath the translucent skin graft. "This is why I never let anyone stand behind me," Dante continued, his voice cracking on every other word. "Why I shower alone. Why I can't, why I've never—" He couldn't finish, his jaw working soundlessly, and Maya realized she was watching the Mafia boss crumble into something raw and human and terrified. Her mother had lost her hair to chemo, her teeth to malnutrition, her dignity to a disease that devoured her piece by piece. Maya had watched nurses recoil from the feeding tube scars, seen doctors speak around her mother like she was already a corpse, and she'd learned that the cruelest thing in the world was being treated as less than human because your body had betrayed you. So she didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She dropped to her knees and pressed her lips to the seam where metal met skin. Dante made a sound like something inside him had shattered, a choked gasp that was half sob, half disbelief. His hand tangled in her hair, not pulling but anchoring, like he needed proof she was real and still touching him. "You're supposed to be disgusted," he whispered. "Everyone who's ever seen this has either pitied me or weaponized it. You're supposed to." "I'm supposed to see you," Maya interrupted, her mouth moving along the cool surface of the prosthetic, kissing each joint, each interface port, each place where his body had been forced to adapt or die. "Not the machine. Not the monster. You." His breath came in ragged bursts, his remaining leg trembling so violently she thought he might collapse. "I'm not whole, Maya. I take 17 pills a day to manage phantom pain. I have to recalibrate the neural interface every 72 hours or my body rejects the connection and I lose motor function. I can't run without overheating the actuators. I can't—" his voice broke completely. "I can't even feel half of what you're doing right now because the nerve grafts only restored 60% sensation." She looked up at him, her hand steady on the titanium that kept him standing. "Then tell me where you can feel. And I'll make sure you feel everything." The armor didn't just crack this time. It detonated. Dante pulled her up with desperate strength, kissing her like she just offered him salvation, his hands mapping her face with a kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. "My right side," he gasped between kisses. "Anything on my right side. I feel everything. My back, my neck, those are still intact. But the left is just echoes, phantom signals my brain can't quite translate." Maya's hands moved to his shirt, stripping it away to reveal the full extent of the damage. The scars ran like lightning across his torso, surgical precision mixed with the chaotic tears of shrapnel. His right side was muscled, tattooed, human. His left side was a patchwork of skin grafts and the faint outline of subdermal support structures that kept the prosthetic anchored to what remained of his biological frame. "This is why you wanted to come from behind," she said, finally understanding. "You didn't want me to see the parts of you that don't match the legend." "I wanted one night," Dante whispered, his forehead pressed to hers, "where someone touched me and didn't have to navigate around the machinery. Where I could pretend I was still the man I was before the bomb turned me into a prototype." Maya's throat closed because she'd wanted the same thing once. Wanted her mother to be remembered as the vibrant artist who taught her to mix colors, not the skeletal figure who died begging for morphine. But memory was a luxury, and the present demanded honesty. "I don't want the man you were before," she said, her voice fierce enough to make him meet her eyes. "I want the man who survived. The man who built a garden in a war zone. The man standing in front of me right now, metal and all." Dante's expression shifted, shock bleeding into something that looked like hope, dangerous and fragile. His hand, the one still fully his, cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted every violent thing she knew about him. "If we do this," he said slowly, "if you stay, you need to understand what you're signing up for. I have enemies who would hurt you just to watch me break. I have a body that requires maintenance schedules and software updates. I have nightmares where I'm still burning in that car, and sometimes I wake up swinging. I have student debt that would take 3 lifetimes to repay," Maya countered. "I have a dead mother whose medical bills bankrupted me. I have trust issues so deep I haven't let anyone close in 6 years. So if we're cataloging damage, we're both walking disasters." His laugh was broken, disbelieving. "You're really not going to run." "I'm really not going to run," she confirmed, and kissed him again to prove it. Softer this time, deliberate, her hands finding the places where he could still feel every nerve-ending sing. His right hip, his neck, the small of his back where flesh was still flesh. Dante responded like a man starved, his movements losing the calculated stiffness as he let himself believe she meant it. He backed her toward the bed, his gait still slightly off rhythm but no longer hidden, and when they fell together onto the mattress, the metallic ticking of his prosthetic was just another heartbeat in the room, mechanical and human and somehow perfectly in sync. Maya's lips traced the seam where titanium surrendered to flesh, and Dante broke, not violently, but like ice melting after brutal winter, his breath hitching in a way that sounded like years of grief finally finding release. His hand cradled the back of her head, trembling so badly she could feel his pulse hammering against her scalp. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, his voice raw and stripped of every defense he'd ever built. "I don't deserve you." "Good thing I'm not asking for permission," Maya murmured against the interface port, feeling the faint warmth of the neural connection beneath her mouth. She kissed her way up his damaged side, every place where surgery had tried to make him whole, until she reached the hollow of his throat where his real heartbeat thundered loud enough to drown out the mechanical ticking below. Dante kissed her like he was learning a new language, hesitant at first, then hungry, his right hand mapping every curve of her body while his left moved with the calculated precision of someone relearning how to trust what signals his brain was sending. When he finally entered her, it wasn't with the violence of a man proving dominance, but with the reverence of someone being allowed into a sanctuary he'd thought was forever closed to him. Maya gasped, her nails digging into the scarred tissue of his shoulder, and felt him freeze. "Did I hurt you?" "No," she breathed, pulling him deeper because her mother had died untouched and alone, and Maya had sworn she'd never waste a moment of connection by hiding behind fear. "You feel perfect. You feel real." Something shattered in his expression, the last fragment of the perfect monster he'd been performing for the world. He moved then with abandon, the prosthetic leg providing leverage his organic one couldn't, the machinery and man working in harmony for the first time since the bomb had redefined what his body meant. They found rhythm together, breathless and desperate, two broken people proving that fractured pieces could still fit if you stopped trying to hide the cracks. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets damp with sweat and revelation, Dante's head on her chest so he could hear her heartbeat the way she'd heard his, mechanical and human and somehow perfectly in sync. "Stay," he said, and it wasn't a command or a request. It was a need. "Not because I'm paying you. Not because you're trapped. Stay because you want to restore more than just my walls." Maya's throat tightened because every person she'd ever loved had eventually left, her father by choice, her mother by death, and staying meant risking that same abandonment all over again. But Dante's titanium fingers were laced through hers, his breath sinking to hers like their bodies had already made the decision their minds were still debating. "I'll stay," she whispered. "But you have to promise me something. Anything. Stop treating yourself like you're a machine that happens to have a human attached," she said, fierce enough to make him lift his head and meet her gaze. "You're a man who survived. Act like it." His answer was another kiss, softer this time, like a vow. The explosion shattered the moment, not metaphorical, but literal, the east wing erupting in a fireball that rattled the reinforced windows and sent alarms screaming through the estate. Dante was on his feet instantly, his body moving with military efficiency as he grabbed the gun from his nightstand and threw Maya one of his shirts. "Get dressed. Now." She obeyed because the smoke pouring under the door tasted like gasoline and burnt plastic, and through the bulletproof glass, she could see figures swarming the garden, at least 20 men, armed with automatic weapons, moving with the coordinated precision of a military assault. "How many enemies do you have?" "All of them," Dante said grimly, checking his ammunition with hands that no longer shook. "And they just declared war." Gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously, bullets punching through drywall and shattering priceless artifacts as Dante dragged Maya toward the reinforced panic room hidden behind his bookshelf. But she wrenched free, her hands gripping his arm with enough force to make him stop mid-step. "The servants' passage," she gasped. "Behind the third portrait in the east hallway, it leads directly to the gallery." Dante's eyes widened because he'd lived in this estate for 7 years and never knew that route existed. "How did you?" "I'm a restoration artist," Maya said, already moving. "I memorize architecture. Now move before they flank us." They ran through corridors thick with smoke, Dante's prosthetic leg pounding against marble with rhythmic precision that didn't slow even as debris rained from the ceiling. Maya noticed it then, how the titanium limb absorbed impact better than flesh, how the pneumatic actuators gave him explosive speed in short bursts that his organic leg couldn't match. His weakness was destroying the distance between them and safety faster than any human could manage. They burst into the gallery, and Maya's heart seized because her mural was still intact, untouched by the chaos consuming the rest of the estate. But the reprieve lasted only seconds before the main doors exploded inward, and 6 armed men flooded the room, led by a scarred figure Maya recognized from the photographs in Dante's study, Lee June, the rival syndicate leader who'd sent the bullet-wrapped note. Finally, June sneered, his gun trained on Dante's chest. The crippled king and his whore, cornered in his own throne room. Poetic. Dante stepped in front of Maya, his body becoming a wall, but she could see the calculation in his eyes. 6 shooters, limited cover, and a prosthetic that would need recalibration in 40 minutes or risk motor failure. The math didn't favor survival. "Let her go," Dante said, his voice carrying the weight of a man negotiating his own execution. "This is between syndicates. She's not part of." "She became part of it the moment you let her touch you," June interrupted, his gaze sliding to Maya with predatory intent. "Word travels fast in our world. Oh. Everyone knows the monster of soul is fucking the artist. Which means she dies first, and you get to watch." Maya's blood turned to copper on her tongue because her father had made the same threat once, told her mother that if she left him, he'd make sure Maya paid the price. Her mother had stayed, and it had killed her slowly over 15 years. Maya refused to be the reason another person sacrificed themselves. She grabbed the scaffolding pole leaning against the mural and swung it at the nearest gunman before Dante could stop her. The metal connected with the man's temple, dropping him instantly, but his weapon discharged as he fell, the bullet tearing through Maya's shoulder and spinning her into the wall. Pain exploded white-hot across her vision, but she stayed on her feet because falling meant dying, and dying meant Dante would blame himself for the rest of his shortened life. Maya. Dante's roar was inhuman, rage and terror fused into a sound that made even June flinch. Then the monster of soul truly emerged, not the controlled killer, but the beast who'd earned his reputation by surviving impossible odds. He moved with lethal precision, his prosthetic leg delivering a kick that shattered the second gunman's knee joint completely, the titanium foot crushing bone like it was made of plaster. The gallery became a battlefield. Dante used his mechanical advantage brutally, the actuators providing force his organic muscles couldn't generate, the reinforced structure turning his leg into a weapon that broke ribs and fractured skulls with surgical efficiency. Maya, bleeding but conscious, fed him intel through gritted teeth. 2 on your left behind the statue. Weight distribution says one's reloading. Her artist's eye translated body language into tactical data, and Dante executed on it flawlessly. June fired twice, both shots hitting Dante's prosthetic thigh. The titanium sparked but held, and Dante closed the distance between them with speed that defied human limitation. His hands found June's throat, and for one terrible moment, Maya thought she'd watch him commit murder inches from her restored mural. But Dante hesitated, his eyes finding hers across the blood-splattered gallery, and she saw the question there, "Do I stay the monster, or do I become the man you believe I can be?" "Dante," Maya whispered, her vision graying at the edges. "Don't. Please." His grip loosened fractionally, and June took advantage, driving a knife into Dante's right side, the side where he could still feel everything. Dante gasped, blood blooming across his shirt, but he didn't let go. Instead, he slammed June's head against the marble floor once, twice, until the rival boss went limp but breathing. "Call the police," Dante rasped, collapsing beside Maya as sirens wailed in the distance. "Tell them Lee June orchestrated the attack. Tell them I was defending my property. Tell them," he coughed, crimson staining his lips. "Tell them the war is over." Maya's hands found the knife wound, applying pressure even though her own shoulder screamed in protest. "You're not dying on me," she said fiercely, her tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. "Not after I just promised to stay." "Then stay," Dante whispered, his titanium hand finding her cheek with impossible gentleness. "Stay and help me figure out who I'm supposed to be now that I don't have enemies left to fight." Police flooded the estate minutes later, paramedics separating them despite Maya's protests. But as they loaded Dante into the ambulance, his eyes never left hers, and she understood that the real battle wasn't the one they just survived. It was the one waiting for them in the aftermath, where a Mafia boss had to die so a man could finally learn to live. 6 months after the gallery became a crime scene, Dante handed the syndicate to Minute Jun, his most trusted lieutenant, in a private ceremony that felt more like a funeral than a promotion. The younger man accepted the signet ring with trembling hands, his eyes wide with the terrible understanding that power was a crown made of thorns. "Are you sure about this?" Minute Jun asked, and Dante could see the unspoken question beneath. Can the monster of soul really walk away, or will the world drag him back? I'm sure, Dante said, his voice steady despite the phantom ache in his right side where June's knife had carved a permanent reminder that flesh was always more vulnerable than metal. But if you need me, I'm one call away. Just don't make the call unless the world is ending. Minute-Jun nodded, and Dante walked out of the estate he'd built into a fortress, leaving behind the life that had defined him for 34 years. Maya waited in a car with no bulletproof glass and no armed driver, just a trunk full of their belongings and a map to a coastal town whose name Dante couldn't even pronounce. She looked at him with eyes that held both question and answer, and he climbed into the passenger seat because she'd insisted on driving, a small surrender that felt like freedom. The town was called Yosa, a fishing village where tourists came to watch the sunset and nobody cared about Seoul's underworld politics. Maya rented a storefront on the main street, its windows facing the harbor, and transformed it into a gallery that smelled of turpentine and sea salt. Dante funded it quietly, anonymously, using accounts so laundered even he'd lost track of their origin. But his real contribution wasn't money. It was time, standing for hours as Maya's muse while she painted him in ways that stripped away the monster and revealed only the man. Hold still, she commanded one afternoon, her brush moving across canvas with the same precision she'd used to restore his family's mural. You keep fidgeting. My prosthetic's overheating, Dante admitted, shifting his weight to his right leg. Neural interface needs recalibration, but the nearest facility is 3 hours away. Maya set down her brush and crossed to him, her hands finding the seam where titanium met flesh with the familiarity of a lover who'd mapped every inch of his reconstruction. Then we'll drive there tomorrow. Tonight, we're going to the beach. The beach was empty except for gulls and the rhythmic crash of waves that sounded nothing like gunfire. Dante walked slowly, his gait uneven but no longer hidden, his titanium foot leaving distinct prints in the wet sand beside Maya's barefoot impressions. She held his hand, not to steady him, but because she wanted to, and that want was the most revolutionary thing he'd ever experienced. Do you miss it? Maya asked suddenly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was bleeding gold and crimson into the sea. The power, the control, the part where people were terrified of you. Dante considered lying, but lies required energy he no longer had. Sometimes. Then I remember that every day I lived that life was a day I couldn't touch you without wondering if my enemies would use it against me. And the math stops making sense. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder where scars from shrapnel still puckered the skin. I miss my mom every single day. Miss the person she was before the cancer, before the debt, before I had to choose between art school and keeping her alive. But if she hadn't gotten sick, I wouldn't have become a restoration artist. I wouldn't have been desperate enough to accept your job. I wouldn't have found you. Her voice cracked on the last word. So I can't regret the pain, because it led me here. Dante's throat closed because he understood what she was offering, not absolution for his crimes, but acceptance of the path that had carved them both into shapes that fit together despite the broken edges. You know what the worst part of the prosthetic is? He asked quietly. It's not the pain or the maintenance or the fact that I'll never run a marathon. It's that for 5 years, I let it define me. Let it become the excuse for why I couldn't be loved, couldn't be whole, couldn't be anything except the role I'd been playing since I was 16. And now? Maya prompted. Now I'm just a man who survived, Dante said, and the words tasted like truth instead of armor. A man who's learning that wholeness isn't about having all your original parts. It's about finding someone who sees the cracks and chooses to stay anyway. They walked until the sun disappeared completely, leaving only stars and the bioluminescent plankton that turned each wave into liquid light. When they finally returned to the gallery, Maya led him to the back room where she'd been working on a new piece, a mural that dominated the entire wall, visible only to them. It showed 2 figures standing in a garden where metal flowers bloomed beside organic ones, their bodies a study in contrast and harmony. The man's left side was rendered in silver and blue, mechanical components exposed and beautiful in their precision. The woman's hands were paint-stained, reaching toward him with fingers that trembled but didn't pull away. Above them, the sky was neither day nor night but the golden hour between, and at their feet, something that looked like resurrection. It's us, Dante breathed, his titanium hand finding Maya's waist. You made us art. I made us proof, Maya corrected, her voice fierce enough to cut through the darkness. Proof that broken things can be beautiful. That scars are just maps of survival. That the secret you tried so hard to hide was actually the most human thing about you. She kissed him then, slow and deliberate, and Dante kissed back with the certainty of a man who'd finally stopped running from his own reflection. The prosthetic hummed softly, recalibrating itself to match his elevated heart rate, and for the first time since the bomb had redefined his body, he didn't curse the machinery. He thanked it for keeping him alive long enough to find someone worth living for. Outside, the ocean continued its endless conversation with the shore, indifferent to monsters and Mafia and the small miracle of two broken people becoming whole together. And in the gallery window, the mural caught the moonlight, transforming titanium and flesh into something that transcended both, two souls, perfectly restored, proving that sometimes the most beautiful art is the life you build after everything burns down.